You're listening to a special version of the Inside Myanmar podcast, covering the military coup and the ensuing protest movement that has developed. During this crisis, we're ramping up the production of not only podcast episodes, but also our blog and other social media platforms. So we invite you to check these out as well. All the other projects that had been in progress prior to February have since been paused indefinitely to focus entirely on this emergency. But for now, let's get into our show. All right, I'm talking with Mimi A. from England. She is the author of Mandalay, Recipes and Tales from a Burmese Kitchen, also runs the site Burmese Beyond, and has her own podcast, the MSG Pod. And it's so great to be able to welcome her and join and talk a little bit about what's been going on this month. So, Mimi A., thank you so much for taking the time to be on.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so before we get into it, can I ask a little bit about your background, about where you're from and how you ended up where you are and what you're doing?
Okay. So my parents came over to England just before I was born, like 2 or 3 months before I was born. I've got two older brothers who were 6 and 9. And they were very much part of there was like a brain drain to the UK at the time of mainly doctors from Burma. And so there was a whole generation that came over with their children. But I think they were very much of the opinion that they would end up going back at some point, especially my parents. And so even though I was born here, I was brought up Burmese entirely, by which I mean we only ate Burmese food at home. We spoke Burmese at home. My parents still wear Burmese clothes, and I do indoors anyway. It's too cold to wear lungi outside. But it's just one of those situations where I think culturally we were very, very much Burmese. But then obviously outside we were, part of the UK. We integrated. It wasn't like we kind of hid and didn't talk to the locals. But it means I'm kind of, I guess it's the third culture kid thing, in which there's kind of two parts of me where I feel very much like I'm from the UK, but I also feel I'm very much from Burma, even though I've never actually lived in Burma. And that's probably because very early on, so when I was 3 years old, my grandparents, my dad's parents from Mandalay, they came to stay with us for a year. And my parents were both working at the time, so they very much kind of looked after me and my brothers for that year. And then after that, when I was 8 years old, my parents could afford to go back for the first time. And so, the whole rest of our family is still there, was still there. And so we went back and we traveled around because, my dad's side are from Mandalay and my mum's side are from Mogok in Yangon. And so we went and stayed with them. We did the thing where, you know how the PR Pura, you kind of go to the PR almost like a fun family trip.
Right.
I'm a terrible Buddhist. I told you this before. I'm about like your average Christian in a Western country. I kind of celebrate the festivals and I know some terms and some concepts, and I know what it's like to have to kind of the Buddhist precepts and stuff. But I'm otherwise very, very bad at that kind of thing. So for me, it's I had these two lives, and then. So I obviously I grew up here, and I carried on visiting family back home, sometimes with my parents, sometimes by myself. And then I ended up kind of getting into writing as a hobby, primarily food writing. And I had but basically, my mum is a really brilliant cook, and she was always kind of hailed as being the best in the kind of the Burmese community here in around London. And she's I think she's fairly typical in that she never had any recipes written down, and she didn't really teach me what she was doing, but I'd observe, I'd watch her in the kitchen and I'd make notes. And then obviously every
Mm.
time I went back to Burma, I would kind of eat a lot, absolute glutton. That's what we would do, and I would kind of ask, we'd bother stall holders and cafe owners for their recipes, and obviously they'd never give us their recipes, but they'd give us hints and tips, and then when we got back to England, we'd reverse engineer how things should be, and so I very much kept alive. Like it's not like what we cook is what my mum was cooking in when we left the country. It's still kind of living, breathing Burmese food, kind of what people still eat in Burma. So forgive me for using Burma because I'm old. I still haven't got around to using Myanmar. But yeah, but basically, I got into kind of writing about Burmese food, and then the way these things work these days is that I was, I suppose, scouted on social media to write a cookery book about noodles, and so I wrote that in 2014. And when that came out, I kind of I shoehorned in a chapter about Burmese noodles because I never really thought that I'd get to write a book entirely about Burmese food. And that book did pretty well. Everyone really kind of liked it. And then at some point, a couple of years ago, so in 2019, I finally published a book about Burmese food. And the thing about that book, which is kind of, I have a funny relationship with my book because it's very, very personal in a way that I don't think many cookbooks are. There's like a 40-page introduction, which is almost an autobiography, where I kind of talk about my upbringing, my childhood, my family. I talk a lot about Burmese culture. I talk about things like the geography of the country and how that's affected, how food tastes have developed and differed around the regions. And, every recipe as well, I kind of put into context because I didn't want to just like say this is a lovely rice dish and you should eat it just because it's tasty. So I've kind of tried to say why I've written this recipe, what it means to me, or kind of its place in Burmese culture as a whole. So, for example, there's my recipe for dumbao, kind of our version of biryani. I've mentioned how this is a really celebratory dish and how it was served at my own wedding. So it's kind of trying to paint a picture for every recipe so people know how these foods are enjoyed and loved and not just trying it and then moving on, I suppose. Um,
Right. That's really great and interesting, and also hits upon how the food and the culture and the people are all intertwined and related and connecting it and bringing it all together. So, on that note, I think there are listeners here who have eaten some Burmese food but can't really remember what it was. Maybe some have never eaten Burmese food. Maybe some have spent some time in Myanmar but don't really exactly know how to classify or describe it. So,
mm.
you being the expert, how would you describe to a novice what Burmese food actually is? How would you categorize it?
Um, so the way I've been describing it probably most recently is I think it's, apart from we don't use coconut as much, I think it's very similar to Malaysian cuisine. And the reason I say that is because it's very much uncategorizable in that, you have rice as your daily meal, but then people love noodles and we love fritters and we love salads and we love soups and, there's, if whatever you feel like eating, you can guarantee that you can go and find it, and it's still very much Burmese food. And in terms of kind of like influences, I think like our salads are quite similar to Thai salads, and our noodles towards Chinese noodles, and I guess our curries are similar to Indian curries. But then the thing that I always find very important to explain to people is that for us, it isn't just different flavors that we like. We're also very we find things like texture very important.
Mm.
So, I mean, the one thing that I've always found quite amusing is that all my friends from other countries in the area talk about how much they love congee because they think it's such a vital restorative thing, and there's like kind of whole rituals developed around it. But in Burma, the opinion of Konji, which we call Sambyo, is pretty dim. We have a pretty dim view of it because it's considered a bit too dull and one note, even if you do put like toppings on it. So what we care about is, for example, the sort of pseudo national dish of mohenga.
Mm.
It's ostensibly like a soft soup with soft noodles in it, but you have to have crunchy fritters on it, and you have to
Mm-hmm,
have
mm-hmm.
the kind of garnishes of soft egg and the coriander, and then you need the spice of the chili, and you have to kind of make sure that every spoonful you have is slightly different to kind of keep your palate alive. And it's the same even with rice, because with a rice dish, might think rice can be quite plain, but we try to serve it with a soup on the side, and with some dipping sauce and some vegetables, and again something crunchy, and maybe a curry and 2 stir fries. So it's like you want to have interest with every mouthful.
Mm.
So that's what I really like about Burmese food.
That's really interesting. It reminds me of I wrote this meditator's guidebook to the country, and we had a whole chapter on food, and we looked specifically at like food at monasteries. And in writing the book, we just reached out to a lot of different people to get their feedback and views on perspectives, anecdotes, and such. And we talked to one Burmese guy who said something that I've never forgotten. And I've talked to other readers of the book who also said this line like just changed the whole way they interacted with Burmese cuisine, where he was actually describing how one sits down to eat a meal, and describing all the little bowls that are in front, the pickles, the kind of clear soup with
Mm,
little herbs, the different curries, the different sauces, the rice. And he was just describing this kind of like critical engagement of like, well, first I take a little bit
mm,
of this sauce with this rice and this texture, and then because it does this thing on my tongue, then I take a little bit of soup, but
mm.
then the soup kind of washes it clean, and now it's ready for a little bit of this. And it was this incredibly like complicated and engaged way to take all these different flavors and textures. And I remember my foreign friends and I talking to each other and be like, I've been here years, and that never occurred to me to do that with all these things. I just kind of ate this, and then I ate this, and then I ate that.
Oh no,
So
and that's why we like to use our hands as well, because it lets us form these little morsels more easily. So.
mm. So what's your favorite dish?
Um, but it changes all the time. I think the ones that I say are my favorite now are just the ones that are my favorite for like sentimental reasons. I think my favorite at the moment is a dish called Mogok,
Mm-hmm.
just because it's a noodle dish from my mum's hometown of Mogok.
Mm.
And the reason that's my favorite is because it means home to me, because
Ah,
basically when we get off the flight and we land in the country and we get whisked to my auntie's house, it's the first thing that we eat. It's on the table ready for us.
all right.
So that's why I love it.
That's great. That's great. So, staying on the topic of food, just to take a moment to understand how the restaurant industry in general has been affected in this year of pandemic before
Mm,
even the February events. I'm curious if you have friends in the restaurant food industry back in Burma, if you've heard anything about how either big restaurant owners or the small shop and stall sellers on the street, how they've been faring even prior to February.
yeah, I have friends in kind of both types, high end and more kind of everyday dining, let's say. And not great is the thing, because everyone's kind of been on lockdown for a while now. There's been a lot of reliance on delivery services like Food Panda. So people are kind of trying to think of new ways to sell their menus, and it's kind of working, but not as well as it would if you could have dine-in as the issue. But I mean, but Burma is very much a kind of a parcel and a tiffin carrier culture anyway.
Hmm.
So I think people already had that kind of mode of taking away food. So I think that's been continuing and been ramped up a little bit. I think the people with the high end restaurants are actually having more difficulties, because
Mm.
those are the people that have been relying on people coming and enjoying the atmosphere, and enjoying being served, table service. But they too are kind of have had to adapt, the methods and the foods that they supply, so it is portable and so it's deliverable. So I mean, people were coping just about. But obviously, the pandemic hit them quite hard, and now it's just, I think people are barely surviving. So
Yeah, I know, and that's in out kind of in society. I know in the monastery and nunnery world that there have been a number of places that have just been without food. It's been really tragic,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean there was this whole these current as well as former monastics outside of Myanmar put together this project last year called Food for Nuns that was actually quite successful in terms of
Right.
eliciting donation from meditators, people interested in Buddhism around the world, to be able to purchase food for a lot of nunneries around Yangon. That just it's tragic because it's such a giving culture and there's so much merit to be made in giving to
Mm.
monastics, but the pandemic was so hard that there sometimes actually wasn't enough food even in monasteries and nunneries.
I mean, I'm not surprised. So my auntie in Mandalay, she's in the habit of doing like the daily salau, and she also regularly went to like Songkar, and what happened? she she unfortunately went to one where one of the gentlemen at her table had COVID, and
Oh
then
no.
she and everyone at the table, and I think everyone in a certain perimeter ended up being quarantined in a like a hotel on the outskirts of Mandalay for like 25 days, I think it was.
Oh
And
wow.
I think she did not enjoy that whole experience.
No, the quarantine centers were really difficult. I mean, they were almost. I also had friends who had to go to them, and luckily they didn't test positive. But the experience just sounded like a nightmare. It sounded like almost like a prison where if you didn't have it, you had a better chance of getting it when you came out.
Oh, that's not good, is it?
No, no. So moving to the current situation, just as if things weren't tough enough, we now have
Mm,
this terrible crisis going on this month, and the response from all sectors of society has just been absolutely incredible. And certainly, this is the case from the cooks and the people in food as well. Some places have been offering free food to the CDM workers, that's the
mm,
civil disobedience movement, as well as to protesters on the front lines, either in the
mm.
form of cooked meals or raw ingredients. And I've seen other stalls, they've outright, so like some stalls have said, any CDM worker eats here for free on one
Yeah,
side of the stall. And then the other side of the stall, they say, we do not serve military or police. So, it's,
amazing.
yeah. So,
That's so
um,
brave as well.
it's so brave. And then there's these protests themselves where various organizations, people, everything else have just offered these huge amounts of food to everyone freely.
Mm,
So
mm.
I'm curious if you, being involved in the food world yourself, if you've been connected to any of these initiatives or people or organizations, if you know anything about how this is being carried out right now.
A lot of it is kind of informally. I recently on you mentioned that I have a podcast myself. The lady that I spoke to, she's actually in the restaurant industry, and she said it's all a bit ad hoc, and the reason is because I mean, I don't know how much people know about the history of Burma, but it's it's always been a situation where you can't necessarily trust people.
Hmm.
There was a system of military intelligence and military informers as well. So it's been people using whatever techniques to get messages to each other and hoping that those messages won't get intercepted. But she has got a group of people that she works with regularly, and it's kind of word of mouth more than anything else, where they have been kind of providing food to protesters. Another friend of mine, she runs like a bigger chain of restaurants, and they've been doing the same thing. They've been taking parcels out every day for people, taking water and other drinks to people. And it was so they have a system where other people like myself can donate to them directly, so they are being funded, so we're not expecting these restaurants which are probably not having any business as it is, aren't being expected to kind of bankrupt themselves in order to help the people out there.
Mm.
Um,
So,
but
how
yeah,
would listeners be able to donate to that if they wanted to?
it's very, very difficult,
Mm.
because as I said, it's hard to know who to trust, so you'd have to know someone personally to do
Okay.
that.
Okay. Right.
And the other thing is with all the banks are closed, so it's not like an international transfer is going to really work at the moment. So
Right, right. Understood. So, how do you think they're capable of doing and managing this? I'm just thinking like one day you wake up, your life is normal, you're running your business, you have your family and professional, whatever your concerns are of the day. And then the next day, you're organizing food for thousands of volunteers. So how do you think this transition has been able to be made to respond to this moment?
I mean, I think part of it is kind of like the Burmese Buddhist personality. Is that the way to say it? Because we are kind of used to feeding lots of people. We have the thing I mentioned before. You have Solao, so you're used to feeding monks and nuns on a daily basis. You're used to kind of doing these charitable donations. So it's not an alien thing to be doing. I think all that's happening now is that they're kind of ramping up the scale of what they're doing.
Right.
And in terms of like how they're funding it, again, like I said, it's partly from donations, and I think it's just partly, I don't know. I actually don't know, and I'm worried that they're going to run out of money soon. So,
Yeah.
um, but I think it's one of those things. So you know how like Burma is consistently ranked as one of the highest countries in terms of generosity and charitable
Sure.
giving.
Hmm.
It's the whole thing about how they'd give the shirt off their back, and I think that's very much the mentality that's dominating right now. So.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and that also fed into my observation of it. Was I noticed that, having lived in Myanmar for a number of years, there are things in society that can be kind of frustrating and not work and in the same way from a Western sense. But sometimes, as I would observe this, I would also observe every single day at every single monastery and nunnery across the entire country, a full and nutritious meal is provided to them at the time it's supposed to be provided.
Mm,
And so you're talking about hundreds of thousands of these meals that have to be provided. Not only are they provided, but they have to be offered the right way. They can't just be like prepared and left there. If they're a few minutes late, then then you're risking that the monk is not going to get his food for the day. For those who don't know,
mm,
I should say, for those who don't
mm,
know the rules of Buddhism, monks and nuns are not allowed to eat after 12 noon.
mhm,
So if you have this great volition of giving a monk a meal at 11 o'clock and then things get a little tight in the kitchen and you don't get it to him until like 11:30, 11:45, well, he has 15 minutes to eat. So like
mm,
you have to have this daily organization of preparing this food. This is of course all voluntary. It's
mm,
these are people who've renounced society, and it has to be offered in the correct way. So there's this whole protocol with it as well. So it's always amazed me, not just the generosity of it, which of course speaks for itself, but the level of organization and coordination. And I see this so I've been at Burmese nunneries or Burmese monasteries and nunneries from the inside where they're doing this preparation. And then I've
mm,
spent time at like Western meditation centers where volunteers are preparing food for, say, like 100 meditators. And you're inside those kitchens and they are like frenetic every day of just like, how do we do this? And what's happening with this? And sometimes things get late. And so to see how much Westerners are like struggling to get this out on time and get this done just in 10 days of their lives, and then to see an entire society organizing this day after day after day without complaining and really without flaw. I've never really seen a meal not turned out on time. It feels like there's got to be something here. There's got to be something with like the organization and the both the generosity as well as the practicality of how it
mm,
gets done,
mm,
that some spirit and ability of what they're doing in the monastery has to be that there has to be some of that spirit now out on the street.
mm. I mean, yeah, I think it is. I mean, in terms of like organization, I mentioned that my mum's a brilliant cook. So my mum is 73 this year, I think. And every day she still cooks a full Burmese meal with like all
Mm,
the accompaniments every day. And before the pandemic, she was in my children's like full-time carer. She's shielding now. But yeah, so she was looking after my two little children and cooking this amazing meal every day. And I swear she didn't blink. And I swear she would just get up and do it and
mm,
be done in half an hour. And I can't do that. And I feel really kind of almost ashamed about it because I feel like maybe I'm too Western. You know what I mean?
mm.
So yeah, I think it is, yeah, there's some kind of spirit there that just makes them incredibly efficient. So, um,
Yeah, right. I mean, just the other day, I was hearing from a friend in Monua that actually 2 days ago, Monua had faced some difficulty with the military coming in, and he
mhm,
was describing how they knew the military was coming, and so he actually lives outside of Monua. So the men were all going out into the streets to do makeshift barricades of like putting their cars out, dirt,
mm,
rocks, wood,
mm,
stuff like that. And so he had pictures of all that he showed me, and then the women all went to cook meals for the guys putting the barricades up. And so it was just like, this is amazing. These residents who one day are going about their lives and the next day are preparing what they need to do to stop an onslaught. And, the food fits into that with how they have to manage that as well.
Well, it's kind of funny. I mentioned this in my book where I say that for the Burmese, necessity is the mother of invention. And
Right.
you know the show MacGyver.
Yeah.
I always used to think that like everyone in my family was basically like MacGyver. My mum especially, to be honest,
Right.
because she could, you could just give her like, I don't know, a bit. See, she's a really good carpenter as well. You could
Uh,
just give her a bit of wood, and she'd have
uh,
like a perfect stool the next day. So,
right.
and yeah, I think there is just that kind of resourcefulness as well. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so moving along with looking at this last month and how it's been, I want to shift gears a little bit and just talk about the personal side of it. And as you know, we've talked offline. You also shared something on Twitter which quite impacted me with being able to express just the personal side of how you were interacting with the tragedy of what was happening. So I wanted to check in now. How are you doing now? How are you feeling?
Um, I have this thing where I think I've compartmentalized my feelings. I think I have to. I'm kind of running on fumes at the moment because the time difference means that it's like tough. It's 2:30 a.m. here is when everybody wakes up in Burma. And when I say wakes up, I mean the internet wakes up because obviously there's been this nightly shutdown where from 1 a.m. to 9 a.m. they don't have any connectivity. So it means I am staying up till 2:30 at night just to
Mm,
find out if my family is still around,
mm,
and checking in on them and making sure that they send me like the little thumbs up or whatever. So yeah, but because of that, I'm obviously not getting enough sleep. But
yeah.
I'm also feeling kind of, I don't know. Like I said, I've tried to compartmentalize things because I need to, keep things together for my children and my husband.
Yeah.
Get on with like the other things that I have to do in my life. But I'm spending like the rest of my time just trying to keep tabs on stuff and trying to spread awareness for what's happening out there because obviously it's like all of these things. I think for a lot of people, it was on the front page when it happened, the coup, and people have lost interest because there are other things to get on with, and everyone's having a hard time because of the pandemic. So, who's going to worry about stuff happening on the other side of the world? So I am kind of spending my time trying to keep it in people's minds,
Mm.
and sharing petitions and sharing links to email templates and saying, "Come on, all you have to do is click here," and every little bit helps. So yeah, it's just trying to juggle things, and I'm not sure how successful I'm being at doing that. Um,
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, same here. If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to read that piece that you wrote on Twitter that impacted me so much. Would you mind if I do that?
no, go ahead.
Okay, so you wrote, something I really don't talk about is to be Burmese, especially if you're of a certain age, to be afraid from bitter experience. It's a low level, visceral feeling most of the time, but sometimes, like now, it can be overwhelming because all the worst things that you can imagine that could happen to you or your loved ones can happen and has happened to you or to people you know because of the Burmese military. Right now, I don't even want to eat, let alone cook anything. There's a reason that Aung San Suu Kyi's most famous book is called Freedom from Fear. So that's what you wrote. I'm curious what was kind of in your mind as you wrote that and as you formulated those ideas.
Oh, what was in my mind? I think the main thing that was in my mind is that I think people see things as very black and white. Um, I think people they tend to just see an incident happen, so they see that a coup has happened, and they don't know anything about the history and they don't know anything about the people of that country, and so they just think, oh, there's some kind of unrest happening in that part of the world. And I think I was just trying to, I was just trying to um, reveal a little part of at least for a lot of people in Burma, a lot of people of a certain generation, something that is actually part of our psyche. The fact that there has been a military dictatorship of some form for like 40 years, and then there was a civilian government, but then in the civilian government, the constitution tied it so that the military still had significant control. And so, it's a world that many of us either grew up in, so my own family would have grown up in it, or I kind of grew up adjacent to it. But because I went back to Burma so often, I saw parts of it. I saw how my family were. I saw how my mum and dad are when they go back, and it's kind of it's a really odd disconnected thing, because obviously every trip home was very, very joyful because I was seeing my family, I was hanging out with them, I was getting to eat lovely food and go to lovely places.
Mm,
But we had this thing where, like, we would get shadowed by military intelligence when we were out there. So
mhm,
you'd see plainclothes officers, just it got very obvious. You could see them following you, and
mhm,
you'd have things where, when I got older, I qualified as a lawyer, and my family said, "Don't tell people you're a lawyer," that kind of thing, and you weren't allowed to talk to journalists, and
mhm.
you couldn't do this and that. So, it was like you could live a life, but it wasn't free, and it wasn't like, and then you'd have these things where people would just disappear,
Right.
and so it was a very, very strange world and a strange life. And as I said, everyone had this fear, but it was a fear that you had to deal with and you had to live with, because there wasn't anything else.
Right. And so even when the country was opening up, from what you were writing, it sounds like that fear was still at a low level, still kind of present and latent and
Oh yeah.
somewhere.
So
Mhm,
like I said, I'm a lawyer, and I read the Constitution, and the Constitution. I mean, I think most people know that the Constitution barred Aung San Suu Kyi from becoming president. That's why they created the office of state councillor. But there are other very interesting clauses in there, articles in there, and one of them is the one that said basically the military is kind of like the fifth branch of government,
mm,
and that it can administer anything it wants, really. And the civilians don't have power over them. And then obviously also the fact that if there is a state of emergency, they can do whatever they like, and that's exactly what's happened. They declared a state of emergency, and then they invoked an article that revoked the human rights articles, which apply to right to privacy, right to home life, right to family. So there was always the sense that I can't remember the phrase, but we were waiting for the other shoe to drop.
mhm.
We knew that this was not
I see.
something was going to happen at some point sooner or later, basically, because the constitution had been drafted in this way.
Mhm. So this was like what happened this month is kind of like a trigger of all of this past trauma and crisis that many Burmese people have been living with their whole lives.
Yeah, so I mean, I have a lot of friends and family who are a lot younger than I am, so they don't remember 1988.
Mhm,
And a lot of them have been around, have been kind of socially active, have been their own people since the civilian government came in 2010. And so they've had like that taste of democracy. And so
mhm,
for them, I think it was genuinely a shock that this
mm,
happened,
mm,
because everything else was just legend, you know?
mm, right, right.
But as I said, for people, older people like me, I'm 42. It's it was, it's not like we wanted to say "I told you so,"
Mhm,
but it was very much oh, I'm getting really bad deja vu now. So,
mm, right.
um,
Yeah. So that piece that you wrote, I should say that on your platform, you've been sharing, you've been really active, like so many of us out there have completely turned your platforms over to this issue and are just sharing news and information and thoughts and other things. This is the only post I've seen of yours. Maybe there have been others that has really hit upon the personal and in a very direct and vulnerable way. Did I know it affected me and I responded to you privately with it. Did you get a response from others with that
I
sharing?
did. I had a lot of people sharing it. So for a lot of people, they were sharing it because they had those exact same fears. But for a lot of people, and this actually made me, I don't, it was quite heartbreaking. A lot of people messaged me and said that their mums and dads had told them these things, and they had
Right.
never, because it was their mums and dads, they just thought they were exaggerating, and they thought they'd never believed it. But to see me, like an objective third party, right, voicing those same thoughts and fears, terrified them and made them realize that their mums and dads hadn't been making it up. And so, like I said, it was kind of heartbreaking because they actually thanked me, because it said that they said that it made them feel more connected to their parents as a result.
Right.
You know, so yeah, that was odd. That was like, quite odd.
Right. Right. Well, I think these kinds of conversations and sharings are so important right now because on one hand you have the political and the national news and the events that are unfolding and everything else, but it's so important to remember that these aren't just things happening outside. These are things that are having an enormous personal impact that are not just happening now at the moment within someone, but that are connected to years and years of suppression and trauma that people outside who aren't familiar with it might not really understand the depth of.
Yeah, I mean, I did share another thing that was kind of quite personal, and that was the fact, we touched on it already, but the fact that because there was a system of military informers, which is still alive and kicking, it meant that you had to be careful what you said, and that also kind of went into the whole being afraid thing. And so even saying the word for government, Asoya, was something you didn't want to say,
Right.
as if he was like Sauron or Voldemort,
Right. Right. Right.
It's just the word for government. You shouldn't be
Yep.
scared to say that, but you were, and you didn't ever say it. So yeah, it's just it's a very odd existence. And it's almost, because the other thing that I mentioned, the other thing that I wrote about, was the fact that it's kind of, Burma is a nation that was gaslit for decades, by which I mean just in the press. So, like, the official newspaper, New Light of Myanmar, had all these slogans on a daily basis saying that, the Damadors, or the military, was like for the people, and anyone else was like a threat to the nation. And it went through a long phase of saying like VOA, Voice of America, and BBC were fake news before Donald Trump said the word fake news. And then, like, even going about your daily business, there were these massive billboards with the same slogan saying that the Dumbledore will crush any enemy, and
Right.
they're your friend, and like massive big red billboards, and they were everywhere. And
it was books. It was printed in every
it
book that
was
was
everywhere,
published.
every
Yeah.
book, newspapers,
Movies. Yeah.
yeah, that you couldn't get away from these. And like I said, they're not, it's not like they were subliminal. They were just blaring out at you. And so it was kind of a weird thing because, like I said, it's like they were just gaslighting the nation for decades. And again, that's something that I think the whole nation must suffer some kind of trauma because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, just an aside, but it made me remember one of those big billboards right in downtown, like near Sule, like with the bridge that's going north from Sule. There was a big one there, and when the opening started to happen around 2012 or something, I remember one day walking down there, and it was like that sign had been. The billboard was still up, but the sign had been down. Then I came back a month later, and I was stunned into paralysis to see that billboard had been taken over by CocaCola. It was like, how symbolic is this? And it was like, it was so stunning. I'd never seen any Western product anywhere in Myanmar at that point because it was all closed. I mean, Coca-Cola was kind of a luxury, fancy imported gift. And it was like, this is really showing from dictatorship to commercialism.
I know, and it was so sudden, and it was so quick. Like all the chain, like KFC coming in 2015 and suddenly being everywhere. And the other thing that, what was I going to say? It slipped my mind now. Okay, it'll probably come back to me. Yeah. So yeah. No, the fact that these things were kind of changing overnight. Oh, that's what I was going to say. So So I was saying about how like these slogans were printed in all the newspapers.
Mm,
So it kind of went away for a little bit, I
right.
think. But then a friend of mine messaged me just yesterday and said, "Oh, they've started again," and she sent me the latest version in the new light of Myanmar. And
Mm,
if anything, it's more verbose than the old version.
mhm.
Like I can barely work out what it's trying to say, but it's just all this kind of weird
Right.
government speak just to mess with your mind and
But
oh
this is
god.
the interesting thing is this is Generation Z. This is a highly interconnected generation, whether it's,
Mm,
TikTok or gaming or Facebook or like whatever the type of online communities that are being created. Like there's been almost a decade of those kind of connections. And so
mm,
it's so to go from, so I was thinking when you said 5 minutes ago how, so yeah, government was a word you couldn't even say in public. Yeah, I remember
mm,
those days.
mm.
I remember one time being with a foreigner who had just come in. We were at a night market and we were chatting. And in the middle of our chat, he just said something about, he said the word Aung San Suu Kyi in the middle of the conversation. And
Ooh.
I freaked out. I mean, I went
Yeah.
like numb from top to bottom. I looked around. I realized I couldn't tell him, I couldn't call him out. So I just was kind of like, hey,
Mm.
so are you done with your meal?
Changing the
Like maybe
subject.
like not just changing the subject, but like let's move and start to walk. And, so like to go from that to Generation Z, where it's
Mm.
like I mean, seemingly every single person is like sharing publicly videos, name,
I know.
profile,
It's
photo,
it's
like,
crazy. I
yeah.
remember in 2012, I remember I was in Bojose and I noticed that they had like calendars of Aung San for
Yes,
sale. And
right.
I was like, how is this happening?
Yeah,
You know? Because
yeah,
my family, they had photos of Aung San and of Aung San Suu Kyi, and they were hidden. They were in cupboards.
yep.
You were terrified that anyone would find them, and
You
to go
couldn't
from that to people selling it on a market stall,
That's right. I mean, you
um,
couldn't say her name in public.
no.
The where her house was located, you
Oh
couldn't even really walk
God!
around there.
I
Yeah.
remember we drove down there once,
Mm,
and I can't remember what it was, but I was told that I had to hide. And we were in
mm,
the car, so I had crouched down in the footwell of the car.
mhm.
I think maybe I just wasn't meant to be in the car at that point or what, but it was because we were driving down her road. So, yeah, that was quite bad.
Yeah, yeah, right. So you wrote this piece that I quoted, I don't know, maybe about 2 weeks ago, a week and a half or something. And
Mm.
I don't know about for you, for me, it seems like every day is a year in terms of
Oh
what
gosh,
develops, what happens outside,
can't
and
cannot keep up.
yeah, and as well as the internal, formulation and recalibration. So where are you at in terms of what you wrote a week and a half, 2 weeks ago? Where do you now sit with that? What's going on now?
Um, I'm still scared, but it's a different type of scared
Hmm.
because the type of scared that I had then was the type of scared that made me not say anything, not want to say anything.
Mm,
Because like you said, I still had that thing, that the hangover of worrying about saying anything anti-government would get me and my family in trouble. And I kind of got to the point where I'm a bit to hell with it.
mm,
Because if we don't do something, those of us that have a platform, that have the
hmm,
connectivity, don't do
hmm,
something, then this
hmm.
is just going to continue. And this needs to be the last generation that suffers like this. So yeah, there's still the fear, but it's kind of I don't know. It's not a cowardly fear anymore because I guess I think it was cowardly, and I
Hmm.
don't mean so much I was afraid for myself. It was more for everyone else that might be affected. It's the not wanting to speak out, not wanting to bring attention. I think more it's the to hell with it. We're all in this together.
Yeah. Well, there's been a momentum. There's definitely been a momentum shift I've been feeling in the past few weeks of just more and more piling on to what this
Oh.
movement means.
Well, I mean, I think the massively groundbreaking moment was when Ujjwal Moton at
Yes.
the UN General Assembly basically defected live.
Hmm.
That was just shocking, but it was also the first time that I felt hope, I think.
Mm,
Because I'm old and because I remember 1988, until that point I'd just been thinking, oh God, this is going to end the same way, they're just gonna, because the outside world won't know or do enough, and the military don't care what's
right.
happening,
Right.
so they're going to lose their patience and they're just going to open fire and just mow everyone down.
Hmm.
Um, but the fact that someone was able, prepared to do that, and I hear his family are already receiving death threats, which is lovely. The classic being accused of being a traitor now.
Yeah.
So he took an enormous risk doing that, but that risk gave hope to all of us.
Right. And it didn't just give
So
hope, but it actually created a pathway for others to do the same. I think that, and
yes,
that's the momentum comes 24 hours after he did that. A monk of some standing got in touch with me and wrote a very direct and impactful open letter. It's anonymous for a
mm,
safety,
mm,
but it's a beautiful letter of him of on one hand, and this is a very apolitical monk. So on one hand, he's respecting the renunciation vows that he took in not involving himself in directing worldly affairs and just wanting to lead protests or something.
mm,
But he's also using his moral authority to be able to speak on this. And so seeing like the ambassador speak at the UN and his and the effects that he had, and then a day later having this monk want to use a platform to speak, and then just has me thinking like, well, can this start to evolve
mm,
into creating space in small ways and big and different sectors of
yeah.
society for more and more to start to say, okay, now and as you've talked about using your platform, it's definitely a decision I've made with my platform to want to take that risk and step up and then create that space for others to similarly do the same.
Yeah, definitely. It's the snowball effect, right?
Mm.
You see other people who are willing to do that, then you feel like, well, I feel like I should do that too. So yeah, you're right. It's not just a case of hope; it's a case of giving people courage, right? So
Hmm. Right, showing a way forward. Yeah. So the that quotation I read of yours, you had mentioned how many Burmese people got in touch with you, thanking you, younger people especially, because it gave them insight into their family and their background. Did you get any other reaction from foreigners or people that, through you writing, allowed them to understand what you and others like you were going through on a personal level?
yes, yeah, I did get a few people. Some were friends of mine who I think
Mm,
they were quite disconcerted because I'm generally known as someone who's quite cheerful, I guess. Not someone that they would have ever thought of as being afraid. And of course, the other thing is that I'm also known as more of a low level person, but
mm,
I'm kind of an activist for kind of issues in this country, in the UK as well.
mhm,
I do a lot of anti-racist work, and so they kind of knew that. I think they always saw me as being cheerful and confident,
mm,
and the fact that I wrote that, I think, freaked them out a bit.
mm.
And so those are people that I actually knew. But I also had strangers telling me that this kind of explained some stuff to them because they were familiar with people from Burma. And it was like a jigsaw piece falling into place for
Ah,
them.
right, right,
Um, and then they kind of thanked me for that and said, it's obviously not something that they would want to ask their friend about.
right.
But stuff that didn't make sense before makes sense now, you know? Um,
Yeah, and there has been, it is a culture, understandably, with suppression. So a lot of this trauma has not properly been processed, and it's almost making me feel like this moment, the suppression I've seen in other moments. I wonder if that the lid is coming off that a little bit in terms of not feeling like one has to suppress things now and allowing it to come
mm,
out.
very much so. I think, as you say, it's a situation where people are kind of, they've had enough. I think
Mhm.
a lot of them, the suppression, I think it was unconscious for a lot of people, but for a lot of people it was conscious. But whatever was causing them to keep quiet, I think, like you said, there's a release happening right now, and I think it's a positive thing. Um,
Mm. Right. And so on that topic of like foreigners trying to or your statement that you said allowed foreigners to have a better understanding of what is going on with you and with other Burmese that are responding to this.
mm,
Myanmar has been a country that's been, I would say, has been quite poorly understood over the years. Historically, it's
mm,
kind of gotten forgotten somewhere between China and India in terms of Western interests. It's always been kind of an extension of how they've looked at those countries, more of a strategic place than something in its own right. And then with the country being closed for so many years, I felt like there were these catchphrases or superficial descriptions that tended to be used to encapsulate the country without really a lot of introspection or follow-up.
Mm,
But in the last 10 years, with the opening, there definitely has been a bit more digging into, some good pieces and some perspectives that have been a bit more nuanced than I've seen before. But now at this time, more than ever, I think people are really trying to understand the country to be able to better understand the crisis playing out.
mm,
So I'm curious, you as a native Burmese who's living in the West, I'm sure you've been called to introduce and describe your culture countless times to people that haven't been exposed to it.
mm.
And with all the coverage going on today, and even after the recent years of openness, what do you find is still missing in trying to understand the country, the people, the culture?
So the, this is a terrible thing to say, but there's been like two very small silver linings to all of this nightmare happening. And I think it's that there's been some kind of I don't know how to say. It's like there's been some attempt to negate perceptions of the country that had been floating around for a very long
Ah,
time.
okay, interesting.
Um, and I think so. One of them, the major one for me, I think, is the fact that there has been for probably the last 15 years or so a very very strong narrative in the West that the women in Burma are very submissive,
Hmm.
like they need saving
Mm,
has been the thing. I remember, probably about 15 years ago, I remember reading an article talking about how there was going to be a charity for kind of saving the women of some downtrodden country. You know how the way that these ads are often run, very
mhm.
patronizing. And I thought, oh God, who are they trying to save now? And I looked at it and it said it was Burma. And I went, what?
Oh,
You know?
mm,
Because I was just kind of so furious that this weird thing had been said about us. And I think, oh gosh, it was a very high profile charity. I think Elton John was one of the patrons, and
mm,
it was just one of the things where they're like, oh yeah, this is the next on our list of people to save. And this narrative has become really entrenched into the media over here. And I've had a whole bunch of arguments with Western journalists because of it. So I don't know if I can say this on your podcast, but
Go
for
ahead.
quite a long time, there was this thing going around where they were saying that there was no Burmese word for vagina.
Mhm,
And they said that this was just emblematic of how this meant we were downtrodden because we
mhm,
didn't even have the vocabulary to describe our organs.
mhm,
And I was so angry about this. It was in the several newspapers. I was so angry about this. I wrote to the editors of both those papers,
mm,
and I said, "Yeah, this is not true. And here's a photocopy of a dictionary entry if that helps. And
mhm.
here are 5 other words that I know. And
That's incredible.
this is just the kind of thing that doesn't help. Well, why use something that's not true to make a point, which I also don't think is true. And they
Mm.
got very angry with me back, and they said, "Oh, well, we spoke to an expert in Burmese language," and I wrote back and said, "Did you speak to a Burmese woman?"
Right. What I'm curious, when was this? Because a couple years ago, big headlines that the Vagina monologues came to
Mm,
Yangon
I
and were
know.
and were
I
and
wonder
I,
what word they used when they did it in Burmese, huh?
well, that was a big deal. I mean, I remember. I don't remember the words because I don't my I'm limited in my vocabulary, but I just remember reading the article and talking about the range of words that they were presenting and the range of meanings and implications
Mm,
behind them. And so the
mm,
whole, I didn't go to the event, but in reading about it, it was like the whole purpose of it was to bring awareness and bring this out of the closet and being able to
mm,
talk openly about just this range of meanings and everything
mm,
else. So it's incredible that you have an event taking place in Yangon a couple years ago that's
mm.
actually talking about this in a very open and progressive way and digging into all the different implications of it. And then you have a newspaper in England that's saying that there's no word that exists at all
Yeah,
when this event is giving 15 different words and all
I
their shades
know.
of meaning.
And so that this was probably at 2012, so a little
Mm,
while ago.
right, right.
And
Still.
but still recent memory. And then there was another article again, and it was talking about how women are oppressed in Burma, and it was saying about how the woman that was being interviewed was very rare because she had a motorbike, and it said she had a motorbike, and I was
Mm,
like. hang on, what? My family's from Mandalay. Most of the people on motorbikes are women.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing.
If you Google image search woman on motorbike, it's a
Right.
street scene in Mandalay.
Right.
It's
City
like,
of bikes.
so what is with this kind of strange narrative that they're peddling? And
It's just, yeah, it's incredible to me that. Sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, so what's happened with all these protests? Obviously, they've been very, very prominent in the media, and people are saying that they're being led by women, and not just women, young women. There's old women. There's the video that was going around of the auntie, the grandmother, who was, blasting the military and the soldiers and saying, "You
Right.
can take me away if you like."
Yeah.
So it's like it's not even that Generation Z is brave and not oppressed.
Right.
Burmese women are bloody minded. We always have been. So.
I was gonna ask you that if you're hitting back at this narrative or stereotype of Burmese women being demure and kind of needing saving. If this is not true, what would be, even before the protests, how would you characterize the? And I know you can't make a general blanket statement. People are different, but if this is, how would you push back against a more authentic view?
Well, I mean, just like I said, look at what's happening now. Look at all the people who are organizing the protests. The people that organize the protests, they're all women. So it's not just the people who are organizing the food parcels. It's the people that are coming up with the ideas of how to protest, the people that are drawing up the poster campaigns, the people that are drawing up the kind of social media and memes, all of these things. It's all women.
Yeah.
It's all women doing it. So you just have to see it. And I've seen people saying that they're really shocked and surprised to see that the women are in front. And I'm like, well, this is just the truth, It's even on a simple day-to-day basis. The fact that someone told me, they actually said to me that they had always heard and read that Burmese women were kind of kept behind closed doors. And then they visited Burma. And they'd been around to lots of other countries in the area as well. And they were very surprised because they said, like, for example, if you go to India, if you go to the markets, all the market holders, stall holders are men.
Right.
Everyone in the shops is men. All the kind of, any shop you go into, any staff, any hotel, it's all run by men. And then if you go into Burma, there are no men to be seen. It's mainly women kind of doing all of this stuff. And they were quite struck by that. And they did say, well, where are all the men? And I went, well, they're doing their own thing. But on a day-to-day basis, it is the women that you will see out there. And in fact, one of the things that a friend of mine said was really noticeable, that after the coup, what changed, because people still have the habit of going out to the market every day, getting their food. What changed was that the markets were, instead of being empty, they were packed. And the reason they were packed was because men were now there with the women to protect them, because they were worried that something would happen. And so she was quite annoyed and said, it's actually a lot busier than normal.
Right. Well, interesting. Is there anything else you find that in this, especially in this present moment, that there's like a missing puzzle piece or something that is not quite being understood in mainstream outside of Myanmar?
So the one thing that this is very controversial, and you might have to cut this, but the one thing that I really, really hate in this country in particular is that they have pitched what's been happening with the Rohingyas, the genocide. They've been pitching it as a religious issue. Rather than an ethnic issue, which is what it is. It's ethnic cleansing. But the picture over here, every news article you read, everything you read says that basically the story, the line is Burma is a Buddhist country and they all hate Muslims. And this is why the Rohingya have been massacred, because they hate Muslims. And this is very upsetting because it's like I said, it's absolutely horrific what has been happening to the Rohingya, but it is from everything I can tell, it is a very clear case of ethnic cleansing. It is not a religious issue, and because they frame it as a religious issue, it endangers but it endangers all Muslims within Burma.
Right.
And who are, well integrated.
Yeah.
I had many Muslims in my own family. And so to be told repeatedly that Burmese people, and I've been told that, so, I've been posting a lot and sharing a lot. I've had people saying to me, Burma deserves this because you hate Muslims.
Mm,
And I just hate that because
yeah.
it isn't, we don't hate Muslims. We really don't.
Mhm.
So this is what I mean about how you might have to cut this. But this is something that's been really upsetting me because I've been getting, like, on a daily basis, I've been getting abuse from people saying that this
Well,
is
it's
karma.
terrible.
They're saying this is karma. This is karma
Oh,
because
wow.
we destroy Muslim people. So so this is the thing that, and what, kind of related to this, what the thing that I have been noting, which is very heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time, is the fact that, the Rohingyas outside of Burma, the ones in the camps, the ones still within Burma, have been, protesting in solidarity,
Yes, right.
you know? It, and the reason is because we have a common enemy who is the military, and life is not going to be good for anybody if it stays the way it is, and that's why they have come out to be, to support everybody, because they are, they're part of Burma. They are part of us, and the fact that, like I said, the fact that they are coming out again, that's been shocking people.
Mm,
I've seen, like, people from Reuters having to put out statements saying it is not true that the Rohingyas like or approve of the coup. It is not true that they support the military, and this is
mhm,
shocking to say. So please stop saying that they wish this on the people of Burma. They are
mhm.
part of the people of Burma,
Right.
and that's the issue. They are part of the people of Burma, so they are suffering in the same way. They're seeing other people suffer. It hurts them as well. And it's very, very sad that the military was so successful in their kind of propaganda campaign against the Rohingya, to the extent that, many people within Burma did believe that they weren't part of the country. When the truth is, they're just as much right to be there as any ethnic group, and God knows we've got so many,
Yeah.
over 135. And so, the fact that, um, it is confusing people, I guess,
Mm,
who are thinking, why are the Rohingyas supporting the people of Burma? And it's like, because they're part of the people of Burma. Don't you get it? You
right.
know?
Right. And then just as you're talking about the reflection on that side, I think just as important is looking at the reflection on the Bamar side, and that there's this incredible transformation going on among at least some people and happening very publicly, where Bamar, who maybe were silent before or maybe even held a certain antagonistic position before,
Mm,
are now going through and kind of internal reckoning
mm,
and then sharing it publicly of,
mm,
of how they were wrong and apologizing. I mean, there's the famous picture of the Burmese guy in the middle of traffic holding a sign that just says, "I really regret about what happened
like,
with."
forgive us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's so, like, when you're getting those comments, those abusive comments from people, I think, like, this is something that comes to mind for me, is that we always have to be ready as people and as humans to be able to make room for someone admitting they're wrong, someone taking
Mm,
steps to move beyond that, someone able to own that and take responsibility and want to
mm,
do what's necessary to heal. Because if we don't make room for that, no matter what someone has done, if we don't give someone the chance to have that genuine reflection and healing, then I mean, you can forget anything. Like, nothing, you can't move from anywhere if you can't try to welcome someone from going through that kind of authentic process.
yeah. I mean, and because the other thing is also, it's kind of part of the whole gaslighting thing that the military has been so good at. The fact that there has been a relentless campaign to paint them as intruders, right? So, very differently from all the other ethnic groups in Burma, they have been painted
Mm,
as the Bengalis, the invaders, right? And
mm,
so, and this propaganda campaign unfortunately worked on a lot of Burma, and a lot of, not just the Burma, a lot of other people believed it. I, I get to be rude about all the ethnicities because I'm a mix myself. Um, but you know what I mean? There were other people that believed these lies that were told, the promulgated by the military, and so, and obviously, Aung San Suu Kyi's shameful defense in the ICJ,
mm,
that was I was so disappointed,
mhm,
as was, everybody outside the world, and that's why she
mm,
fell from grace, right?
mhm.
um and I've no idea what was going through her mind when she did that, but unfortunately, it kind of cemented for a lot of people that it was right, and the military
Yeah.
downplaying what was happening was true, because that's the thing. They weren't just painting them as, intruders. They were also kind of saying, oh, it's not true that we're massacring them and they're all fine,
Mm,
and so you're being kind of pumped with this fake news over and over again. And so you have people who are, they're not speaking, because that's the thing, that there's been a lot of people saying, why did you not speak out for the Rohingyas? Why are you only speaking out now?
mm.
And it's partly, I think, for probably for a significant number of people, it is because of this campaign that basically made them believe that the Rohingya were their enemy when they're not.
Right.
But it's also, we're going back to the fear thing, because I think for a lot of people who did sympathise, they were too scared to say they sympathised.
Yes, right.
So I've seen examples. I see there's a guy who has just confessed that he, and this is so sad, he went and made a documentary. He went and stayed in the Rohingya camps, and he talked to them and he interviewed them, and he realized that everything was true. Everything he'd heard was true, and he made this documentary. But then he was too scared to know what to do with it, and so he's been hiding this documentary. And then he posted on Twitter, I think, recently, saying, I'm going to release this documentary,
Mm.
and I was too scared to do so before, but I'm going to release it because people need to know the truth.
Is this is That Sway Win?
I think it might be. I can't actually remember.
Right.
It probably.
Mm.
I don't know how many people would have gone undercover in a ranger camp to do a documentary. But it's possibly the same guy. But yeah, he again said that he was ashamed because he had never said anything, even though he'd gone to that length to try and tell their story. But he was still too scared. He had still been too scared to do anything with this material, with this footage, until now.
Right. And I think there was also this uncomfortable dynamic that even I felt, where like the way the Western media started to portray this, they were kind of putting it in as the wedge issue, which is a very kind of uncomfortable way to frame it, as the Buddhist Sangha. And the Time magazine had that famous head. I cringed when I saw it. I still remember where and when I was when I saw this front cover that was like it was the face of Buddhist terror, and it showed right. And as, not to say that that's not correct or they don't have the right to do that, but that framing of it as if you're a devout lay Burmese Buddhist, part of a Burmese Buddhist community, and you see a non-Buddhist, foreign, non-monastic criticizing in this way, it immediately brings back these kind of imperialist overtones and this inferior position of Buddhism. And so I think the way that was framed from the beginning just kind of encouraged a defensive stance of the Sangha. And even those people that wanted to speak out against it, it was this uncomfortable position of kind of like speaking out, taking steps to speak out. You had to somehow do it in such a way that was clear that you were not going against the overall Sangha or the value of the monkhood or the Buddhist religion, because these dynamics were already in place that just made everything so uncomfortable. So, so one of the things I've seen in the past few weeks is more people speaking out, and both monks as well as lays from the Burmese Buddhist community. And I think some of those, in hearing how they're framing it, I think some of those people are actually recalibrating and going through an internal transformation, and as mentioned before. And others, I think, have actually held these views for quite some time and have just, it's just been very difficult to know how and where they're able to get them out. So, I think there is this opening. I mean, as you mentioned, there actually are some silver linings from this terrible event happening. And
very small ones.
Very small, yeah. But who knows? Nargis was Cyclone Nargis in 2009, I think it was. Maybe I have the date wrong. 8, can't remember. That was an absolute tragedy.
I know exactly when it was, and the reason I know exactly when it was is because the military pushed through their new constitution in the wake of it. And they did that deliberately because basically the country was already traumatized, and they just went new legislation. So yeah, it was 2008 that happened.
2008. So that's this terrible tragedy that happens that actually spawns this flowering of civil society because of it. So, there are these events that can have offshoots in ways that are positive in their own right.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's quite a Buddhist thing to do, isn't it? To find the silver lining.
Well, it's all you can do in these kind of situations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So looking back overall at where we are now, like at this moment and at this movement, what would you say has been something that has surprised you the most about how things have played out?
Um, this is going to sound really bad, but I'm surprised they haven't started shooting sooner. And
Mm,
again, I think that's just like my horrible kind of PTSD, even though I
right.
wasn't actually in the thick of it. Um, and the other thing that surprised me, and I guess this call goes back to the whole "we mess with the wrong generation" thing,
Mm.
is the fact that the civil disobedience movement has been so creative and unconventional that I
Right.
don't think the junta has known how to deal with it.
Yeah.
You know, so, people marching and shouting protest slogans and, small acts of violence, they can quash. They can call it civil unrest, right?
Hmm.
They feel like they can open fire with no, compunction. But people, pretending their cars have broken down, or drag queens marching down the road in their beautiful high heels, or people throwing onions on on the freeway. It's like they don't know what to do.
Right.
And it's been really it's been really good to watch.
Yeah.
Sounds bad, but like as an observer, I'm
Mm.
just enthralled by what they come up with and what happens next. And then obviously, the other thing is like making huge murals using like a whole township,
Mm. Mm.
spelling out the words "We want democracy." Or CDM Mogok, it's kind of like
Mm.
it's crazy. And again, as you say, someone was saying to me, they saw one which says CDM Pagan, and it was at the bottom of, I can't remember which PR it was. It was the one you might know, the one that's very square, the golden one that's very square. And I'm being very terrible, but basically there was a human formation that says CDM begun
Hmm.
underneath it, and
Hmm.
loads of my friends were commenting saying that is the neatest writing ever. Like
Right.
they've managed to curl that C so perfectly. How did they do that?
Mm.
And I'm like, oh, it's just it's Burmese efficiency. They want
Yeah.
people to be able to read the message.
Yeah, and when you talk about that kind of innovativeness, the thing, all those things you mentioned really struck me as well. And one of the things that really astounded me, God, I'm just so amazed at the process I went through and understanding how this played out. So there was a video a few days ago. I don't know if you saw it. It was like a 2-minute video of what appeared to be a soldier showing his weapon and saying, I'm going to go out in the streets, and at 8 o'clock p.m. I'm going to start shooting people. If you want to
Mm.
be a martyr, then bang your pot because I'm going to aim for the head. And
Oh,
it
that
was,
guy, the
yeah.
guy
So,
that, oh,
right.
yeah.
So when I saw that the first time, I was kind of paralyzed. It was kind of like another one of those other things that was just like, oh, geez, like, oh, I was thinking about all my friends and about the fear
Mm,
this instills, and was just really freaked out and disgusted and horrified in watching this, and, really tapped into my triggers of the terror that could come. So I'm just kind of processing this during the day. And then I
mm.
go online like another, like, I don't know, a day later, and I see this is so, I don't know if you saw this. It's so incredible. So someone with some Burmese with tech savvy had like watched that video really carefully and had
Mm.
showed how like in that 2-minute video, there were like 5 points in the video where the person behind the camera was telling him what to do. And he
Really?
paused those scenes. He paused them and he replayed them back like 5 or 6 times. So
Right.
you could hear, he was like as he's putting the gun together, you could hear the guy in the background and he's translating it. He's putting subtitles on the screen. He's saying, okay, so at this point, the guy behind the camera is saying, now turn the gun on the other side so they see the back of it. And he's kind of whispering that. And then you'll see the guy holding the gun, then turn it around, like just following the directions. Or like as he's saying something, you might say like, we're going to, another thing was like, we're, because now like, rule like 534 is in effect or whatever it was. And then you hear the guy whisper, they won't know what that means. You need to say martial law. And
So he was being
so
directed. Oh,
exactly. So
wow.
so this is
Oh.
like, so he is taking, so it's like this amazing moment of like this trick that the military is trying to do to instill fear that actually isn't, it's not an organic video that
Oh,
is
wow.
actually going to happen, but which is the effect it had on me. But he's taking all of those layers off to show this is a scared, and very inefficient and very,
being put up to it.
Right. Being put it to, and when you watch it again with those in mind, and one commentator even put that in the video, like, this is not a soldier who's actually going to do this. This is kind of a pudgy actor who doesn't know his lines and is just trying to put this energy out there. And so it's like, but when you really step back and look at this whole process, it was like, this is a video put together for propaganda by people who don't know nearly enough about multimedia as the audience is intended for, because the audience just picked apart everything that was wrong with that video.
That's the thing. I mean, that's the thing. They are outclassed in that respect completely.
Yeah.
And again, that's something that they did. They've messed with the wrong generation, and I really hope that I mean, even this weekend, they've been mobilizing the Milk Tea Alliance. That in a couple of days, like, you've got people protesting in Thailand, and kind of in front of the Burmese embassy there. I think some of them got arrested, and it's just the solidarity just somehow just done in a matter of days, and it's because they are so online. They understand how to communicate, even though the internet's being shut down every night. So,
and that was the thing when you looked at at 88 and 07, there were nights where, like, dozens of people, sometimes hundreds, got arrested or killed, and even people in the country didn't know about it until days or weeks later. Now, when you have one death, that person is celebrated and honored the next day. I mean, you are seeing their biography, their background. Sometimes you're seeing the moments before, during, and even after the death. So you're humanizing these individual people in ways that were never able to be done before.
And it's so important because, it's the whole thing, one death is a tragedy. A lot of deaths are a statistic. We can't let them become statistics, right?
Right.
So yeah. And the fact that the first two deaths were pretty much children as well. It's just, it's kind of, it is really important. But that's the thing, and the other thing, that even if the military do think they can do whatever they like, they're being filmed constantly. They can't do anything without someone seeing what they're up to, even if they are shutting down the internet. Because as soon as people get back online, that thing's being uploaded.
Right. And there's other ways now to get things out.
Yeah, there are. So it's kind of extraordinary. I mean, even after like day 2 or 3 of the coup, they went, okay, well, Facebook is the internet for Burma. We're going to shut down Facebook. And so they did. And then absolutely everyone, including everyone's like old aunties and uncles, downloaded a VPN.
Right.
So like everyone was back on Facebook. And that's why the military went, okay, well, then we'll shut down the whole of the internet. So it's kind of every time they try to do something, so far everyone else has been able to keep ahead of the game.
Right.
And long may that continue, because
right.
I have to believe that like Ujjwal said, that the revolution must succeed, right? So,
yeah. And looking back over this month, what would you say has touched you the most?
I think what's touched me is probably the fact that, even though I remember from the papers and the TV footage at the time what happened in the previous kind of uprisings, the fact that I'm getting to see it almost in real time, and as you say, it's humanizing the faces. The fact that I'm this is going to sound weird, but I feel like, but the other thing I don't think I mentioned in that piece that you quoted, but I've said elsewhere, is that I have an unbearable amount of survivor's guilt. By which I mean the fact that I don't live in Burma, but the rest of my family do. The fact that I can't swan in and out, but do you know what I mean? I can leave,
right,
and they can't. I have, for the past however many years, 30 or so years, felt very, very guilty about the fact that I can't do more. And the fact that this past month I have been able to do stuff that has had some kind of positive effect that has seemed to be helping. So at the moment, what I've done is that a friend of mine who has a much bigger platform than I do on Instagram, he's got almost 20,000 followers. I've only got 5,000. He's also got a very different audience from mine. I think most of my followers are kind of Burmese or interested in Burmese stuff already. So his is like completely a new platform. He gave over his stories to me this weekend.
Nice.
And so what I've been doing is I've actually got arm ache because of it. I've been posting because he wanted me to kind of update his audience on what's happening in Burma right now. So you know the whole hashtag what's happening in Myanmar.
Right.
And I decided to use the platform to explain what's happening now, but also how we got to this stage. And so like yesterday I posted basically a history lesson. It's like 40 stories explaining the troubled past of the country, and the fact that, you know, we've been under military rule of some sort for a very, very long time. The fact that the whole nation is traumatized and has been gaslit all this time. And again, we've both been getting messages from people, either from Burmese people who are either grateful that their story is finally being told because they've been too scared to say it themselves, or from people who never really understood, because if you're in Burma itself, you don't get taught this kind of thing necessarily.
Right.
And that is a way that I've been able to use my privilege insofar as, because I don't live there, I have access to resources that they do not. And so I can post links, I can post stories. I've grown up knowing about things that they haven't been allowed to know because they grew up in Burma. And so, and also the fact that because I'm bilingual, I also have two sets of resources to draw from. But it means that I've been able to paint a full picture for a lot of different groups of people. And it's been quite upsetting for me, because as I've been posting all of this, I've been thinking, oh God, I'm reliving, because I've been putting a lot of personal stuff. So I've posted about how some of my family have been political prisoners. I've posted about how one of my uncles died because of treatment he received when he'd been in prison. So there's all this stuff that's coming out of the woodwork for me as well. But I think it's been very helpful just for informational purposes, as well as kind of cathartic, and not just for me, for people that are reading, for the Burmese people that have been reading. So that's something that I've been doing this weekend, and that has been quite, I don't want to say rewarding, because but do you know what I mean? I feel like I'm finally being useful in a way that I've not felt useful before. So,
I can understand that. Yeah, so that does bring up a point of, you mentioned how a number of foreigners are being able to tap into what you're saying and have a better understanding, start to be concerned. I think a lot of foreigners who are outside the country, but either connected to it for one reason or another, or just caring about a people that are suffering so unnecessarily right now, that there is this sense of like, what can I do? And whatever limitations I have, if I could do something, I want to, what can I? So I'm sure people ask you that too. What is your response when you hear that?
I have a link tree in my biography on all of the social media platforms, and it has basically about 6 or 7 actions that people can do.
Oh, great.
There's a number of different petitions. There's a petition asking governments to basically recognize and honor the election results. There's another one asking that the ICJ basically investigate Min Aung Hlaing's war crimes. There are various templates so that people can write to their representatives to put pressure on them. There is a list of the dirty list, which is like companies, international companies that have military links. And there's like just a news feed so people can actually just keep up to date with what's happening. And so there's just like a list of 6 or 7 actions that people can do so that they can feel useful, and and not feel like they're just watching and not being able to help, because you can help, even if it's just clicking a link and signing your name to a petition. So.
Right. And I think just staying informed is one form of help as well, as
very much so.
Well as reaching out. I mean, I was talking to a Burmese guy on the front lines of the protest last week, and when I asked him that question, his answer was just one thing that was so simple. It just said emotional support. It just said you can't understand how important it is for us to hear from you as foreigners. Like, if we just know that you care. And I was really astounded by hearing that, because I also felt helpless and felt like I should be doing more. And since he said that, I have been really promoting his message across everyone I'm in contact with. And, I almost think like a campaign of just like encouraging people outside the country that are interested to like adopt like 5 to 10 Burmese friends online that you just check in with every day, that you just say
Just
like,
make sure they're okay.
yeah. And that, and also just like, how are you feeling? What are you doing? What's been going
Yeah.
on? I support you. This is where I am. And cause I really was undervaluing the power that can play, but that was, to him, there was nothing greater than that. That just like he
Yeah.
said, protesting, he said, he's laughing and saying, one of the things you don't really understand, and I didn't either before I did this, is protesting is really hard. Like, it's really tiring.
Gosh, it must take so much out of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And he said, so we need gas in the tank, we need to keep going. And if we
Yeah.
know that we have, that your emotional support is behind us, it gives us that gas to keep going. So like, no matter how small it seems here, it's not small there. And in that letter from the monk that we posted yesterday, that was how he ended the letter. He said, at the end of this letter, he said, you're noticing that in the protests, they are switching from more Burmese slogans to English, and they're doing that for the foreign community to be engaged and to care. And so please care about this. You are the hope, you are what we need right now. So that's definitely something I would plug. And it's so easy to do, is just, if you have Burmese friends that are over there, talk to them, check in with them daily, let them know that you support them. If you don't, Burmese are so friendly and meeting new people and engaging, and it's really easy to just start talking and just meet someone on some social media platform and just let them know that you care and you support, and when they're having a good day or a hard day, that you're just there to chat with them, and that you really can't underestimate how valuable that is.
I mean, it kind of related to that. I've kind of somehow, well, not somehow, obviously, I seem to have developed a whole lot of little brothers and sisters who message me and go, Ma, can you, what's going on? Can you help me? And what is, again, this is just really heartbreaking. I was talking to one of them about something, and then they said to me, I just want you to know, I'm not like police or MI. And I went, I know you're not. I can tell you're not. And I feel really bad that you feel like you have to reassure me that you're not an informer. So yeah, but it is. Yeah, I have adopted lots of little brothers and sisters, which has been really, really nice.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, I know there's so much going on in this month, and probably in your own life as well. Is there anything that trying to cover and understand this and bring this understanding to more people? Is there anything that I haven't asked about that's missing in the conversation you'd like to share?
I don't think so. I would say, I mentioned before that I'd taken over someone's Instagram account. So they have actually they've saved all of the stories on their profile. There is like a little kind of icon in the highlights that is just called Myanmar. I would urge people to just look at that, because I have spent quite a long time documenting a lot of, what's behind Burmese history and culture, that kind of explains a lot of what's happening right now. And I think it will help explain a lot of the nuances that people might be missing. So yeah, please read. It's got links as well, because that's the other thing. Because he's got a lot bigger platform than I have, he can actually post links. So I'd inserted links to a lot of further reading material. So if you see a story and you're thinking, "Oh, what is that about?" I should have inserted a hyperlink for you to go to an article and read more. So it's a very potted history, of course, but it will help. I think it will help people understand why what's happening is happening. So
And what is the social media account where people can find
so
it?
so it's a gentleman called Matt Inwood. It's MATT_INWOOD. So he's a friend of mine, who is he's actually as an art director. He worked on my first book. That's how I know him.
Oh, great.
So yeah, he's a really, really lovely guy, and his feed is normally just beautiful pictures of food, surprisingly. But he felt so moved actually by something that I posted the other day, that he just contacted me and said, "Please, can I pass the mic to you?" So that's what he's done, and so as a result, I've been able to put all these resources together that you can click and look at, so that they're not just stories; they're actually clickable. So yeah, please
That's
go and look at that.
Yeah, that's great. And that's really what we need more and more, is to help continuing building this momentum, opening up spaces where other people can also feel comfortable and have the courage to share from their points of view.
Mm,
And if someone, even for people out there that don't necessarily have their own platforms or involvement in this, just the emotional support. I mean, just to
mm,
be informed at minimum, and to reach out to a few people, even if they're new friends you make online, and whatever your
mm,
social media platform is at your choice, that is giving gas in the tank of these people who are
mm.
all running on fumes right now.
They are. They really are. And I'm just amazed. I'm just constantly amazed at how they can keep going. And so yeah, like you said, we need to support them as
Mm.
much as we can, however we can.
Yeah, I mean, every day there's, I don't know how many videos or pictures there are that drive me to or past the brink of tears, in terms of what new
Oh,
development is happening, or what new role of
no.
courage has taken place, or what
Oh
new terror
no.
has come that they're responding to. And
I was just, like just this morning when they opened fire on all the medical students. So just all these students marching in their white coats, and you just think, oh, how can you do that? How can you do that? It's just unreal, absolutely unreal.
yeah, 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 it is. There's no sense that can come from it.
Thank you so much for letting me talk to you. And then, yeah, I hope that it helps people understand where we're coming from, and how we're all just hoping for a better future for everybody.
So in that case, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here and chat with us. I think this has been really quite valuable, and really appreciate it. As a small, mostly volunteer team, the production time for a single episode of Insight Myanmar podcast can sometimes be as long as 4 months from start to finish. More recently, we've tried to increase the speed of this process for special episodes, but the fastest we've been able to manage has been around 3 weeks. During this current crisis, however, where even a single day can be so urgent, we simply don't have the luxury of waiting so long. We've worked around the clock to shorten this time frame, and some episodes have managed a turnaround of just 36 hours. Similarly, while our previous goal was to produce a podcast once every 10 days, we are now trying to put out episodes as soon as they finish, knowing how valuable it is to get these ideas out there at this critical time. However, we cannot accomplish this increase without your support. If you have found value in today's episode and think that others may also benefit from this type of content at this time, please consider making a donation so that we can continue our mission. If you would like to join in our mission to share the Dhamma from the Golden Land more widely, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Every cent goes immediately and directly to sustaining the programming. You can give right on our website via credit card by going to insightmyanmar.org/donation, or through PayPal by going to paypal.me/insightmyanmar. We also take donation through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. In all cases, simply search Insight Myanmar on each platform and you'll find our account. Alternatively, you can also visit our website for specific links to any of these respective accounts, or feel free to email us at info@insightmyanmar.org. In all cases, that's Insight Myanmar, one word, spelled INSIGHTMYANMAR. If you would like to give in another way, please contact us. Thank you for your kind consideration. You have been listening to the Insight Myanmar podcast. We would appreciate it very much if you would be willing to rate, review, and/or share this podcast. Every bit of feedback helps. If you are interested, you can subscribe to the Insight Myanmar podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, please check out our website for a list of our complete episodes, including additional text, videos, and other information available at www.insightmyanmar.org. If you cannot find our feed on your podcast player, please let us know, and we'll ensure it can be offered there. There was certainly a lot to talk about in this episode, And we'd like to encourage listeners to keep the discussion going. Make a post, request specific questions, and join in on discussions on our Insight Myanmar podcast Facebook group. You are also most welcome to follow our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts by the same name of Insight Myanmar. If you're not on Facebook, you can also message us directly at info, I-N-F-O, at insightmyanmar.org. If you'd like to start up a discussion group on another platform, let us know and we can share that forum here. Finally, we are open to suggestions about guests or topics for future episodes, so if you have someone or something in mind, please do be in touch. We would like to take this time to thank everyone who made this podcast possible. Currently, our team consists of 2 sound engineers, Martin Combs and Tharng A. There's of course Zach Hessler, content collaborator and part-time co-host. Ken Pransky helps with editing, and a special Mongolian volunteer who was asked to remain anonymous does our social media templates. In light of the ongoing crisis in Myanmar, a number of volunteers have stepped in to lend a hand as well, so we'd like to take this time to appreciate their effort in our time of need. We'd also like to thank everyone who assisted us in arranging for the guests we have interviewed so far. And of course, we send a big thank you to the guests themselves for agreeing to come on and sharing such powerful personal stories. Finally, we're immensely grateful for the donors who made this entire thing possible. We also remind our listeners that the opinions expressed by our guests are their own and are not necessarily reflective of the host or other podcast contributors. Please also note, as we are mainly a volunteer team, we do not have the capacity to fact-check our guest interviews. By virtue of being invited on our show, there is a trust that they will be truthful and not misrepresent themselves or others. If you have concerns about the statements made on this or other shows, please contact us. This recording is the exclusive right of Insight Myanmar podcast and may not be used without the expressed written permission of the podcast owner, which includes video, audio, written transcripts, and excerpts of any episode. It is also not meant to be used for commercial purposes. On the other hand, we are very open to collaboration. So if you have a particular idea in mind for sharing any of our podcasts or podcast-related information, please feel free to contact us with your proposal. If you would like to support our mission, we welcome your contribution. You may give by searching Insight Myanmar on PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, GoFundMe, and Patreon, as well as via credit card on our site at insightmyanmar.org/donation. And with that, we're off to work on the next show, so see you next episode.